We have with us Sarah Brennan, which is the founder of Acceler Insights. She's a leading analyst in the talent technology field. And we also have with us Paul White, which is the director of recruiting operations at Kindred at Home. So welcome to you both. Today, they're going to tackle one of 8 conference topics. What steps should recruiters take to ensure they maximize their ROI in technology? And what's really cool about this conference, if you haven't already attended a session with us just yet, is that you can get involved in the conversation. After 20 to 30 minutes of dialogue from Sarah and Paul, you can then personally get on the virtual stage and either comment or ask a question. All right then, so it looks like our panelists are getting set up here. Now that you have a bit of a lay of the land, I'm going to turn things over to Sarah and Paul for a quick introduction of themselves, and then they'll jump right into the topic for today. So Sarah and Paul, it's all you.
Paul, would you like to go first? Paul, were you going to go first?
Can you hear me? I was going to let you go first.
Okay. Sure. The connection's a little bit hard to hear you. I can go first. My name is Sarah Brennan. As mentioned, I'm the founder of Acceler Insights. As of next week, I will be the CEO of Aspect 43, which is a company to really connect buyers and tech vendors so that you could shift how you're really learning about technology a little bit more. I've been in the industry a really long time. I absolutely love everything that TA Tech has done and been really proud to be able to position and work with them over the years. Paul?
Yeah, my name is Paul White. I'm currently the Director of Recruitment Operations with Kindred at Home. We're the nation's largest home health and hospice company, and I've been in talent acquisition leadership roles for the past 20 years in retail, telecommunications, and manufacturing.
Perfect, that's great. Heather, were you moderating or do we just jump in?
Yeah, if you guys want to go ahead and jump in for your 20 to 30 minutes worth of dialogue on the topic today. And then as questions come along following your conversation, we'll bring those to your attention.
Sure, that sounds great. Paul, I guess I would ask you as a practitioner, what is one of the biggest challenges of trying to discover ROI in recruiting technology specifically?
Yeah, there are a lot of challenges. One thing that most companies struggle with is determining the effectiveness of their sourcing channels, because we spend a lot of money on outreach and marketing our positions and find it somewhat difficult unless you have the right system in place. It can be difficult to track what's effective and what's not effective and where your best hires are coming from, and just being able to link through not only to track where your hires are coming from, but how effective the hires are once brought them on board.
Agree. And I think one of the challenges I see, and I think one of the things we talked about when we first met and did our call, is we come at this really from 2 very different perspectives. And one of the things I see is when we're coming in and we're working with the executive teams and they're trying to understand why somebody's even wanting to buy this technology, right? Like, why is the director of TA pushing this? Why is the manager of talent management saying that we need to do this? What are the recruiters actually saying? I think one of the things that they're also looking to do, and has really been historically a struggle around technology, is tie it back up to bigger business values and bigger business goals. And how it actually hits the larger scope. Let's go. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I agree with you, because I think the further up the chain you go, the different.
Yeah.
So it's hard sometimes for someone in a leadership position to understand the struggles that recruiters go through day in and day out.
Absolutely. And I started my career as a recruiter, right? So I definitely have a soft spot for sourcing and recruiting and TA. And so it's really challenging. And we call ourselves a lot of times translators, Because a lot of times it feels like what we are doing is coming in and not really saying all that much new, but we're just translating the right words from the recruiter to the management team, from the management team to the executive team, from all three of those to a product, and to the vendor team. And how do we really get everybody on the same page? And I think that's one of the biggest obstacles to really finding good ROI out of your systems, is getting everybody speaking the same language, which just gets harder and harder every single year with all of the like buzzwords and all of the marketing material and everything else that's coming out. It's really hard to understand and know, and just kind of take a moment to calm and be like, now what actually matters?
Right.
So when you think of ROI, how would you say the topic is best defined? Like, why is this important now versus a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? What has changed?
Well, I think HR is taking the leap to start to measure itself on outcomes. I think it's more and more important within HR to be able to show a return on
Yeah.
investment so that we can show the value that we add to the organization, because we are overhead.
Right.
One thing I've seen change over the last probably 5 years is Wall Street's taken an interest in succession planning and hiring. Because if a company can't put frontline workers on the line to manufacture the product, or a nurse to care for the patient, then the company's going to lose revenue. So I think that's become increasingly more of a focus of executives now that Wall Street is, discussing it during investor calls.
Right.
So I think that's helped HR make that evolution to become more of a metrics driven operation, especially within talent acquisition.
And I think that one of the other things that we're really seeing is that there's enough of an ask for this. The technology providers are starting to really shift and provide this, and the technology itself has evolved and changed enough where you don't need a report writer full time anymore to be doing reports. I mean, I remember when I was leading a TA team, and I think we had 16 of us on our team. And I had one person whose full-time job it was just to do metrics and reporting. Like that's all they did day in and day out, because there wasn't a way to do it from the systems. I mean, we have progressed so much. If the last time you've looked at technology was, 5, 10 years ago, what you get now for, quite honestly, for less money than what you got then is so far superior. And one of the biggest differentiators is that reporting and analytics, and for companies that want that extra level deep dive, you have another level of technologies that can kind of sit on top of what is already really good by comparison and do that. And I think the access to being able to run reports is also opening up the eyes of some people who probably wanted to do it before, but it was just so time intensive it wasn't possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd like to change the topic a little, getting back to what recruiters can do to maximize their return on investment, because
Sure.
I think depending on the size of the organization and the culture within your organization, it can be difficult for a recruiter to have that influence or impact. A lot of times it may be the IT operation that's driving the technology that you utilize. I think it can be difficult for recruiters, but there are things you can do, even if you can't participate in the selection process or the implementation process. You can efforts to learn what the technology can do so that you can utilize it more effectively, because there are a lot of shortcuts and value adds within recruiting systems that people don't use because they aren't aware of them. So one thing a recruiter can do is take it upon themselves to utilize training resources available through the vendor or through their organization to really understand how to utilize technology effectively, can get the most bang for their buck.
Perfect. And I'll go off and expand on that a little bit. I think if you are a practitioner, whether you are a recruiter, a manager, a coordinator, anybody in kind of that realm, there's really three areas where you can really have high impact of ROI on your technology, and see how you could develop your technology ROI. The first is if you have access during the buying process. more and more we do see recruiters being at least asked some opinions in the process. That doesn't mean they're going to get what they want, but they get to see what those options are. And I think if you have the opportunity and you know that there is a buying process going on and an ATS, a CRM, recruitment marketing tools, any of this is even up for discussion, I think it's really important that you come at it not from a point of, well, I like this one, this is a good brand, this one's cool, all of that. Like come into it like a business discussion, come into it talking the way the IT talks, come in talking to the way the executives talk, and come in presenting what the value add is going to be for the business, not for you. And a lot of those value adds are going to be the same. So you could talk about how it's going to add more time on if you go with product B versus product A. You could talk about the impact on candidate experience and on employee experience, but don't come talking about that if you don't have the stats and the information as to why it's important for the business to back it up. The second part is when you come in or a decision has already been made and they tell you, hey, we're using ATS XYZ. Good luck. But it hasn't gone through implementation. It's a really key point, even if you don't make it onto the implementation team, to offer to be some executive insight, right? Offer to give some feedback to them, to test it out. Like, let me help you any way I can. Let me just give you feedback and make sure that as you're going through that process, that you are being seen as a value add versus somebody that is going to be a detractor. They're going to need people to support that. And sometimes that decision's already been made. It doesn't matter how much you hate it. You have to figure out how to make it work the best as possible. The third is if you already have a system in use. So you come into an organization, there's already a product that is sitting there that you possibly like, or you don't like, or you're not familiar with it, but it sure doesn't seem like it works very well. That is one of the biggest areas of opportunity, quite honestly. And it's because you can come in and take a look at something and see a couple of things. You can keep track of what is coming up for updates and turning things on and off, and really be an advocate for your team to leadership, to the IT person, to whoever the HRIS person is that's overseeing that. A lot of times we actually see upgrades happen and nobody told the IT department that it would be useful. And so that communication and that interaction is really, really key. The second part is going through, and sometimes these things are simple configurations that you can do with your account manager. You don't even need IT involved. So you can go through and make some process changes and some of these other steps. And then finally, like was already said, like go to the training, get to know the product, understand. And if you need workarounds, find workarounds. Like most people do not function their TA department in one solution. In fact, I find it really uncommon that people have less than 5 or 6 different products that they're using. So figure out how those products can work together and figure out what the value add is going to be in order to make business cases to make change.
Those are all great points, Sarah. And one other thing that could be valuable for you is search out user groups, because most of the technologies today have user groups that you can participate in, so you can share best practices with others. And I've learned a lot throughout the course of my career about how to better utilize technology and better configure the technology we were using by participating in those user groups. So that's always a value add.
And I'll just caution everybody also to be really careful about online communities, because sometimes it's where people go just to vent and just to complain and not as purposeful as trying to really improve and make changes. I can walk into the same company or 2 different companies that use the exact same technology. One company loves it, one company hates it. 99% of the time, it's because of how they chose to implement it and how they chose to use it. And if they would tweak and fix their implementation, the product would work perfectly fine for them. When we were doing previously at my last company, when we were doing evaluations where people wanted to switch, we were able to save the product roughly 66% of the time simply by making tweaks to the process and tweaks to the implementation and setup most of the time, which cost the company absolutely nothing to do. It's just nobody had thought to be a little bit creative and really work with their vendor to figure out what is and isn't working correctly.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've seen the same thing. It's all in how you configure the system and how you use it. And just reiterating your point earlier, if you keep your attitude positive and talk about how you can help, it's going to
Yeah.
come across 100 times better than being negative and complaining, because that doesn't usually get anybody anywhere.
Yep. Um, what do you think could stand in the way? So let's say a TA team has great technology, which let's say they have average technology, right? Let's not go and push it to say great. Let's say they have average technology. They have something at least, which is better than a lot. What sometimes gets in the way of really identifying positive ROI?
One thing that I've encountered is, in order to measure it, you have to track it. So sometimes things aren't tracked as effectively as they could be with the one-off spends. You're not running everything through your applicant tracking system. You're not going to be able to get accurate cost per hire out of that system. So that's the challenge too, because it can become a very administrative task to try to input the information in there to get accurate reporting out of the system. So I think that's one thing that can certainly be a challenge.
I would add on to that. I think that is absolutely accurate. And I would just add on to that. I think that there is sometimes we have it all set up and we've got everything ready to go, but the teams themselves don't actually understand the larger strategic goals within the organization. And I'm finding more and more the executives are requesting not things like cost per hire, but they're wanting to know about diversity stats. They're wanting to know about source of candidates that are coming in, where they're falling off in the process, what the just like we have succession plans for our businesses, kind of what those pipelines look like for key roles. And do we have people in place and set up so that we can move quickly if we needed to, especially for high volume type of situations. And so I think that there a lot of times happens to be just, again, that disconnect of where we for so long only had the opportunity to focus at such a small level of impact that we kind of started getting used to running reports on like time to fill, cost to hire, all of this. And we didn't really have the opportunity or the option to really expand that up to things that were a little bit more business line oriented, like looking at internally, what internal candidates do we have? I think that there's going to be a really big shift. And maybe this gets into our next question of, what do we think is going to change in 2021 to 2025 timeframe? Not way down the road, but like really pretty immediately. And I think one of those is there's going to be a shift in accountability for recruiters and TA teams to also look at internal mobility and look at internal employees that want to transfer and handle that a little bit more effectively. And also our employees taking a little bit more control. We've spent a lot of time talking about candidate experience for the last decade. We're starting to finally talk about the employee experience. And we have to remember that an employee is still a candidate. They just might not be your candidate. They're a candidate for somebody. So you either have to treat them that they're going to be a candidate for you or they're going to be a candidate for somebody else. And so from a TA and recruiting perspective, we have to shift our thought and our philosophy around that these like sourced out looking candidates are going to be the best people ever, when we probably have even better quality candidates inside that we're just not paying as much attention to. Their managers aren't necessarily paying attention to. And I think we're going to see a real merger on an evolution of that role, quite honestly, in order to impact the ROI of the tech.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's absolutely necessary, because in a lot of organizations, the HR generalist or a talent development team internally will manage the internal movement. And sometimes they don't partner well with talent acquisition. Right. So I think having the whole view of your talent pipeline is going to make you more effective as a recruiter. So I think that evolution is absolutely necessary.
I think it's going to also be very interesting. We are not very far off from a very automated talent experience. there's a difference between personal and high touch. And there's nothing wrong with automation. That doesn't mean, it doesn't have to be one-on-one to be personal. And it can be automated and still high touch without as much of a human involvement. And Paul, you and I are both well over the age of 30. We have gone through at least probably 3 recessions at this point. So we've seen this kind of ebb and flow and what it has meant for hiring and what it has meant for business, and also what it has meant for the contraction of the TA as a career, quite honestly. And that evolution is what it has really impacted and moved technology forward in a lot of ways. And I think we are seeing that right now again, where we are seeing a high level of automation. It is likely going to displace a lot of TA jobs. And but it's going to do it in a way that can be done in a very strategic way that allows people that can be strategic, that understands the ROI, that understands how to partner with their technology, that understands how to partner with their executive leadership to move into a much more strategic understanding of the impact that they can have. I mean, TA has such a huge potential for impact to the broader business if we can really grasp the technology and the usage of the technology that we have, which is quite honestly more advanced than many other departments in the organization, not just HR. But if we can really grasp and understand that, and as I mentioned earlier, translate that to the executive level, it's going to really kind of level up a lot of the people that are already in these roles doing great jobs.
Yeah. And I think the programmatic advertising platforms really help with that, because they help optimize your spend so you're not spending money unnecessarily to draw candidates in that you don't need because you already have enough. And it also gives you better metrics. If you can run everything through a single source, or at least be able to pull all that data together in a single source, then that's going to give you a wider perspective and more detailed perspective of where you should spend your money, and what's going to give you the best ROI. And when you can take that data and show the executives that you're making data-driven decisions as to where you recruit, and can explain why you're recruiting from those different sources, that increases your credibility within the organization, and you start to get a different level of respect.
Mm-hmm. And I think as we see more and more companies coming into more of a combined talent management strategy and more of a combined solution, we're also going to be able to see recruiters and TA teams really start looking at performance of long-term and retention and quality of hire and some of these other areas. And so we're going to be able to move from really just like, here's what we know what we've done, but also to be able to see the impact that we are having long term, which is again where taking the technology and really getting the most out of what we're spending is going to provide a little bit of value. And I know I just got a note, so we have a couple of questions that they would like to start working on. So Heather, whenever you are ready, we'd love to hear them.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. So we've had a few questions that were submitted ahead of time. And just as a reminder, when you're called upon, please make sure that you turn on your camera and your microphone, and then you can field your question to both Sarah and Paul. So first up, we have Roger. So we'll give Roger just a moment to get set here for us and take his question.
Hi, Roger.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Good.
Good. I like your background.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, it's great to be back in our offices finally. So that's always a positive. But I'm the Roger Lear, president of Orlando Jobs down here in Central Florida. But I was just wondering, how has COVID impacted TA technology adoption and utilization?
I will tell you that we work with a lot of vendors, and we work with a lot of vendors on exactly that, on scaling growth, on profitability and adoption, which is the most important. Many of our clients are having their best year they've ever had. And we are seeing companies buying technology at much quicker rates. And part of the reason is kind of what I had just discussed is there are downsizes coming. And typically HR and TA are some of the last groups to get downsized. And so I think that is going to be something we have to be concerned with in 2021, but that doesn't mean that the companies are going to be stopping hiring. They're just going to start doing it a little bit differently. And automation is going to be one of those things, much like we saw with job boards early 2000s. Right after 9/11 and kind of in the late 90s, it's the same type of thing. And right after the financial market, we saw a big wave again in kind of 2009, 2011 timeframe where everybody was on the boom. I think we're going to have that exact same experience where the teams are going to be contracting, but they're going to be contracting because they're going to be able to use automation to do it smarter, faster, better, and easier.
Yeah, and I think that it's also forced utilization of technology that people were nervous about or scared to use before, because we've done a lot more video interviewing and actually hiring people without meeting them in person, which we would have probably not seen this quickly without COVID. And I think the transition to virtual work is going to become, I don't know that everybody will go back to the office because people will move in. They can do it from home now, and companies are seeing that they can save dollars on real estate. So I think the way we work will continue to change, and in order for it to continue to be effective, the technology is going to have to continue to evolve. So I think it'll evolve faster than ever.
Roger, I'll tell you one example. We've actually built a custom ATS solution that can actually take somebody through the entire hiring process without ever having to touch a recruiter. It's a high volume type of, it's not for everybody, right? But for companies that are doing high volume hiring, where really it's just like, we need somebody that's going to show up, pass a very basic background. We're going to train them. That's really low skill. We just need them to like show up and work. And they're just setting it up. It was set up so it could just hire based off of some initial screening questions, some basic background information, and confirmation that they could work on those days. And it has been widely used. We're not talking about a couple hundred hires. This is for a very large organization that needed to do something custom because they knew they didn't have the bandwidth and weren't going to have the bandwidth, but they needed to be able to hire quickly, and it's been quite successful. I would not doubt if I saw some vendors coming to us to actually build something similar that could actually go to market, because I think there is going to be a demand for that probably within the next 12 months.
Oh, wow. Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. All right, so we have another question from Mona. So Mona, if you'd like to turn on your camera and your microphone, please.
Yes, thanks so much for this great discussion. My question for you today is, in today's ever-changing technology market, what technologies do you find are most influencing the TA tech stack?
I'll start with that, because something that's really revolutionized recruiters at multiple organizations that I've worked in is the advent of text recruit, and just the ability to communicate with candidates through texting easily, because we get a much higher response rate and it's easier and it fits the lifestyle. So I think we're going to have to continue to adjust our technology in the way we communicate with the lifestyles that our candidates are living. So I think that's one example that's really changed and improved the way that we work.
And I'll add on to that. I think I have three that I could think of right off the top. The first is the programmatic. I think that has been really impactful from actually looking at budgets and helping people understand, especially ones that were trying to just make tweaks but didn't even know where and what to do. The second is similar to the text, but it's also just the bot in general. And whether it is on via text, whether it is on a screen, whether it is on a website, being able to interact in an AI type of situation with a bot and get questions answered, go through some of that screening, and then directly being able to set up and schedule an interview is becoming really easy and simple. And it is definitely more reflective of what the consumerized experience is. And the third, we also talked a little bit about it, is the role of video. And I think what video interviewing is versus when we first started talking about video interviewing, gosh, at this point, a decade ago, more than a decade ago, 12, 14 years ago, it is no longer just about like a video interview. There is so much that can be done as far as assessments and the amount of data analytics that sit behind these type of tools. And it isn't just video, but it is a phone. You know, there's phone interviews that can be done completely one-sided, much like a video interview can do, with analysis and data. And we're able to actually harness the information in a way that we never have in order to be able to make decisions that are not based on our gut or our feelings about somebody, but actually on information and performance and things that actually impact and can show if somebody's going to perform very well.
Thank you. I have one follow-on question. But
Yeah.
I appreciate the nod to programmatic, as that is the world that I live in. You know, my follow-on question, and it's related to what you said, Sarah, around video. Something
Yeah.
that we found our clients to be very interested in and focused on right now is diversity and inclusion.
Yes.
And ensuring that that process is integrated into the talent attraction and selection and recruiting side of their organization. You know, when it comes to video, do you think that hurts or helps that effort?
It helps. So I did the first large scale research study on video interviewing in 2007. This has been a industry. I redid it again in 2011. It has been something that has always been really kind of close to my heart, and I loved. And one thing I can tell you is this was the exact same conversation when it first came out, along with people aren't going to sit on video. That's crazy. You know, and so we actually found that video interviewing in companies that were struggling with diversity inclusions, we were able to identify managers or recruiters that were consistently making decisions based off of somebody's gender, ethnicity, color of their skin, color of their hair, whatever the case may be. And we had literal video proof of them doing it time and time again. We were able to see who was getting scored differently. And now as you move those technologies even further, we can actually do full analysis of the words that are actually being said. And in that way, we could tell if somebody's scored much lower, it actually can flag. So somebody from a recruiter perspective or a manager perspective can actually come in and see, like, this seems like their score is significantly lower than the words that they said. Like, something should come in, something should look at this. One of the other things that I think gets overlooked a lot is with the one-sided or asynchronous video interviewing. One of the things that has happened in some of the research around interviewing that we have found is that as soon as somebody gets on a call, based off of maybe the name they see, the address they see on the resume, the school they see on the resume, any of those things, they might ask the exact same 5 questions, but they don't ask them in the same way. There's tone, there's attitude, there's nonverbals, there's everything else that's going to make somebody feel more comfortable or less comfortable in that process. When we remove that human person out and we put it into where it's a video of somebody asking the question, everybody is being asked in the exact same way, with the exact same tone, with the exact same inflection. And in my mind, it definitely levels the playing field quite a bit.
Thank you so much. Great answers.
Thank you, Mona. All right, I think Peter Weddle also has a question for the both of you.
Great discussion. Thank you very much, Sarah and Paul. I've enjoyed it. You guys did a great job covering the issues of integrating the technology into the organization, the interface with the individual recruiters, with the process, with the culture, all of that, which is critical to maximizing your ROI. My question has to do with the relationship between the technology that you're considering acquiring and the technology you already have. How do you evaluate the integration of a new tool into your tech stack to ensure you actually get the outcomes you're looking for without degrading everything else you've already bought?
Paul, do you want to take that? Would you like
Yeah,
to?
I'll start off and then I'm sure you'll be able to expand greatly. But I think that's a great question because one thing that sometimes isn't thought of when you're making a migration or a switch from one technology to another is all the historical data that you could lose. And in having the conversations with IT and HRIS and trying to build the tool where you can migrate all the data from the last 5 or 10 years or however long you've been using the tool, it makes it a much more costly endeavor and investment. So, and then there's also in the IT world that would like to start off clean. So I think one of the challenges is if we make this migration is, you've got to weigh in the cost of losing that historical data if you don't or aren't able to take that with you, because that can be a great candidate pool, especially in healthcare, because as students apply over the years and then they gain experience later, it's a great resource to be able to go back and market to those individuals. So not losing that data, I think, is one of the important things to think about when making a migration.
And I think as we are talking about it earlier on from the actual like buying point, right? We're looking at a product, we need to buy a product. There are a couple schools of thought, depending on the type of solution you have. If your core solution is a legacy type of product, it definitely makes it a little bit more challenging. But even also the legacy products at this point have opened up certain types of partnerships. And in a few handful cases, they have APIs. Believe it or not, many of them still don't have APIs. But you could do it at that level. If you have a newer solution, most of them have a pretty open API. So take a look at their marketplace, take a look at any other relationships, and don't think that just because somebody isn't on there, it can't be done pretty quickly. APIs today are not the same as integrations of years past. And products that are built on newer technologies, I have seen connected up in weeks or months versus what used to take years and tens of thousands of dollars. And that's just because the way the technology itself is architected, which gets way too into the nerdy stuff that nobody actually cares about. But the way it's built to start with today, it's built now in order to work with other stuff and to both send and receive the information in a really fluid way. And so as you're going through the process, make sure that you ask about integrations, make sure you ask about the APIs, and even within those, ask about the types of different integrations and the types of APIs they use, because it might not even be the same vendor to vendor, even within their own marketplace. One other thing I will just caution people that are looking as they are buying, if you're going to a product that is kind of a full suite or a provider that maybe has a little bit of everything, some of those, even within the TA world, use everything as integrations behind the scenes. It's actually not a single platform type of solution. And so it's really important to understand that, for instance, if you're using payroll vendor XYZ and they also have an ATS, that doesn't mean that ATS is going to work any better with the rest of your HRIS than any other ATS would. And so it's really important just to find things that are going to work really, really well. But I would really caution people to look at APIs versus traditional integrations.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. All right, I think we have another question from Pete. So Pete, you ready to go?
Hi, Pete.
Maybe Pete wasn't ready to go.
Wait, there he is. No, I see him.
Yeah, I was having some technical difficulties there. No worries. Okay, so thank you for your contributions, obviously. So my question is, if you already have a recruiting system in place, how do you maximize the ROI in the system that you have?
So I think that goes back a little bit to what I first talked about. If you already have one in place, you need to look and see where it's causing you frustration. I mean, that's the easiest way to explain it. Like, where does it feel like it isn't working for you? And then go in and try to identify if it's something really easy, like we have to do these 2 clicks and there's no reason it should be 2. Sometimes it's simple as doing some configuration in the back of the system, which is going to take 15-20 minutes and completely make incredible amounts of change. The second thing to do is to reach out to your account manager or your customer success manager at your vendor and explain the frustration and say, I don't know what the right answer is. Because if you try to tell them what you think it is, a lot of times they'll try to solve what you're telling them instead of coming up with a solution that they know that other people are using. So go to them and say, I don't know what the right answer is. This part seems like it's too complicated and it shouldn't be doing this. Is it possible we set something up wrong? Is it possible that we set it up for a different process? Is it possible that you have somebody that is doing something different that could possibly benefit us? Probably 70% of the time, the customer success manager is going to be like, well, yeah, if you did this a little bit differently, or if you did this a little bit differently, they'll be able to make some pretty significant changes without you having to go through a full re-implementation. For products that were set up, I would say more than 3 to 5 years ago, you probably would be better off by going through and doing a full system review and evaluation. Odds are it is set up to an old process. Odds are it is not set up to even take in the current features and functionality. These products are updating at a minimum quarterly with new features, new functionality. And we see all the time where features and functionality just aren't turned on, where the recruiting teams are incredibly frustrated. They don't like, this sucks. We're stuck with it. We have another 3 years on this contract, blah, 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 blah. And I come in and they're like, well, it can't even do this. And it can't even do this. And it can't even do this. And I'm like, it can do all of those things. No, it can't. Well, it can. Who is doing your system admin? Like, we need to go back through and look at that because something is wrong at that point. And sometimes the easiest way is to approach your vendor and say, can somebody do a demo of the current solution? We're not happy. We think there's something wrong with the product. We're considering leaving. Can you show us if it's the way we have it set up, or if it is actually the product itself? And most of the time they'll give you, ask for like a sales demo so you can see exactly what the full scope of the product is.
Yeah, and I think that's really important that you get an understanding of what the capabilities are, because to Sarah's point, things change quickly and most companies don't keep up with the evolution. And there's usually a lot more you can do with your existing system. The other thing you may want to look at is bringing in a lean expert to look at your process.
Yeah.
You're currently recruiting in the most efficient way possible, and identify that efficient process, and then go back to your vendor and see if there's a way to modify the system to support that optimized process.
Yeah, it's I think one of the mistakes people make is thinking that technology is going to fix anything. Technology optimizes a process, which means if you have a bad process in place, you have an outdated process in place, it's going to highlight, optimize, and show every single flaw in that process. And so it's really important as you're going through this to really sit back, and you have to look at it from a place of humility, right? Like, there's no ego that can be had when you're trying to kind of tear apart a process and figure out why you're doing things. It can't be, well, this is just how it always is done, but why? Learn, like, act like a 2-year-old. Why, until you have the answers. And you'll find a lot of stuff is like, oh, well, that was because back before we had a system, we had to do it this way. And before we bought this, we had to do it that way. And you'll find a lot of inefficiencies that are actually built in that are causing issues. within the system, there's so much you could do. If you can't buy a new product, I am not the first one to say you just have to go buy new tech, go buy new tech, go buy new tech. I think you could save old tech. And I think you can make old tech really efficient and really, really good for you if you have your process clear and you have the setup of the product the best you possibly can. And then you might have to bring in some supplemental solutions and some additional things to kind of layer on top, whether it's a CRM or recruitment marketing, video interviewing, some of these other pieces to really make it successful, but you don't have to rip and replace everything.
So it sounds like you think the systems are adaptable enough for.
Not all of them. Most, I'd say 90% of them.
Okay. So that sounds like it lands on the team, though. That there needs to be, as you said, a demo. There needs to be better team training to adapt to the team to the solution, as opposed to going out and shopping for new tech.
Well,
And
I want to clarify one thing that you just said, because it isn't adapting the team to the solution. It's also adapting the solution to the team. One of the biggest challenges we see a lot of times is a leader will come in, a new TA, new head of TA, and they buy a product and they set the product up from whatever worked at their last company.
Right.
That doesn't make a difference at this company, right? And so it might be inefficient. And so it is both. You have to make sure that the team understands how to use the technology and like Paul had mentioned earlier, some of the shortcuts, any of that. But the technology also has to be configured in a way to meet what the team needs. It has to be both sides of it.
Right.
But there's usually somebody that is defining what that is. And a lot of times that person has nothing to do with the actual practitioners at all.
Yeah, and I heard in the conversation earlier the importance of forming a true partnership with your vendor. So I think the most successful solutions out there today are ones that are more proactive and are approaching their customers to understand the needs and modifying their solution to meet those needs, and also being proactive to say, hey, we haven't reviewed your system in 2 years. Why don't we look at what we can do? And I think if the vendors can help drive that, and they do drive that, that's the sign of a good vendor partnership. So I do think it can be a two-way street. You approaching them and ask them, challenge us, because we want this to be as successful as possible. So challenge us on things we can do to improve our processes based on what you're seeing from your other clients.
And I think that's really important, Polly, and really fundamentally, it's one of the reasons why we're launching Aspect 43. I think that there was a period where people felt like they had to distrust their vendors and they had to turn to all of these third-party consultants and turn over here because you can't trust the vendor. You can't trust what the vendor's saying. And the vendors over the last like 5 to 8 years have matured so much, and they are bringing in the top talent in the industry, not just for kind of traditional sales, all of that, but for thought leadership roles, to be doing internal education, to do customer success. I mean, they're bringing in practitioners like never before. I mean, they are publishing data and research that us as analyst firms are envious of. Like, they are doing so much. And I think there has to be, and there is now as of next week, a new way to kind of connect the vendors directly with those buyers, because the buyers have to rebuild the trust with the people they're buying the products from, or there isn't going to be a positive relationship. It's really hard to be in any type of relationship if you don't have mutual trust. And it's hard for a vendor to really want to help you if they always feel like you think they're trying to like screw them over or do something wrong. That partnership is so, so, so important in the buying process.
I totally agree. Sarah and Paul, thank you for your time. We very much appreciate it.
Hang on, Pete, if you wouldn't mind. I have been intrigued with this discussion. I'd like to just carry on a little bit. A couple of years ago, at one of our annual conferences, we had a panel of 4 vice presidents of talent acquisition, and one of the questions that they were asked was, "Where do you go to get the information you need to even know what's out there in terms of the realm of possibilities for tools? And what are your trusted sources?" And this is what keyed me, your comment about trust. what are your trusted sources for information about those tools? And their response was universal. All four of them said the same thing. And to me, it was startling. Notwithstanding the fact that vendors spend a fortune on exhibits and so forth at conferences, these leaders said they personally never look at those exhibits. And they don't think that the information that their team brings back is always all that helpful. They also said that they never, now this was just 4 people, but this is what
Yeah.
they said, they never accept calls from vendors, just won't answer the phone.
Agreed.
So where they went for information was to their peers, which is fine, but they don't always have the greatest experience, the greatest visibility. So, you know, what's the best way to create this partnership you were talking about? What's the best way to create that connection so that the employers know what the state of the art is, what's the range of possibilities, and vendors can, if they can put their hyperbole aside and their hype, you know, provide the information for informed decision making.
I'll tell you, we do buyer research and regularly have for 10 years. What you're saying resonates, not just with those 4, but across the board. We also have found that going to peers is the most dangerous way to buy technology, because people are looking at it and saying, well, they don't like it. Well, they don't like it because they set it up wrong, right? Like how they chose to implement it, how they're choosing to use it. It's much like asking somebody like, you know, did you like that restaurant? Well, yeah, it was awful. It was horrible. Well, but you don't like Indian food. Well, yeah, it was gross. It was all Indian, right? Like, you know, so there's a lot of room for error in there. One of the things we have found most recently in our research has been that there was a shift over to looking at blogs and thought leaders, right? Like experts online. And that has drastically dropped off as well because there's a lack of disclosure, is what our report says. People are not being disclosing who their clients are, what boards they sit on, where they have all of this stuff. And so there's a little bit of this other side. The other area that they were going to were some of the rating sites. Well, then all this stuff has come out with Amazon buying ratings and all of this. And now they're feeling nervous about any of the rating sites. You know, and again, a little bit of a shameless plug. I mean, we've spent the last 2 years trying to help educate the vendors on how to better connect, not with sales material, but with actual market education. Like, be the experts. You spend all this time, all this money, instead of spending $150,000 on a booth, why don't you spend $30,000 actually doing better education that is going to help level up these people instead of sales and all of this other stuff. Like, still go to the conference, but put some of that money aside. I think that COVID is actually going to change this entire dynamic of how people buy technology. And part of it is going to be because of having to look elsewhere. We know from mid-market companies, their number one place where they actually find is going to be Google. They will go to Google, and that's where they start getting their short list. There's other companies they'll get added in, but they're shortlisting. When I talk about mid-market, I'm talking about 1,000 to 10,000 employee companies. And smaller businesses under 1,000 are even higher than that on using that type of stuff. I mean, our goal with what we're doing is really to combine and give open access to both sides to be able to connect, not through ratings, not through lists, not through anything else, but through the sharing of information, by democratizing information and opening the door. And then if an HR person sees anything of value, they could reach out to those vendors. But if they don't, and it's going to make the vendors level up. We have to change how you buy technology in this industry. We have to change it because it has failed miserably for the last 20 years so far.
And I think everybody uses Google today, but I do think there's some value in having discussions with your peers. I wouldn't let a peer make a decision for me, but they can certainly shorten my learning curve as far as who's out there, who I should look at. But I think the most important thing is you're going through the process, because a lot of times you build a relationship with a salesperson and then you get to implementation and they disappear and you have somebody appointed to be your account manager to support you on the customer service side. I think that person needs to get involved from the beginning, and you need to interview those people as you're making a decision, because it's just as important who's going to support you throughout the life cycle of your tenure. And people turn over, so there's no guarantee that's going to stay there. But I think that's important, because having a good personality match, and I think vendors that are hiring people that sit in my seat to hold those roles, that to me gives me credibility, gives them credibility, because I know that there's somebody there that speaks my language. It's not somebody that's just sold.
Right.
So I think the vendors that invest in the knowledge base, bring those people on board, are a step above, at least in my experience, because they can relate to me and help me brainstorm and troubleshoot and solve problems.
I'll also say, again, like you said, those people do turn over. I think you get a little bit of a healthier look if you look at sites like Glassdoor and you look at the overall rating of a company, and you see if it is trending up or trending down. Obviously, there's always a little bit of ebb and flow, but overall, if you have happy employees at your vendor, you are likely going to get better service than if you go to a vendor whose employees are not happy, seem to have constant turnover, are not getting paid fairly. So making sure you look at that. And I know a lot of vendors cringe when I talk about this, but I am such a big believer in, if you want to see a company that's great at customer experience, look at one that's great at employee experience, because the two go hand in hand.
Yeah, and customers that have user groups, I think that's really important too, because
Yeah.
they're putting themselves, in the spotlight when they invite users to come in and talk about the company and what they can do. So I think that's the sign of a good partner as well.
Heather, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. All right, so we have just a few moments left before we head into an intermission. So Sarah, Paul, are there any final comments that you would like to make as we wrap up here?
I'll just say, if you're really looking to get the ROI out of your tech, make sure your tech is working for you first and foremost. So do what you can. And a lot of those tweaks can be made without having to spend any money at all. And secondarily, make sure that you understand what the broader business goals are, so that you understand what ROI you have to even be trying to prove.
Yeah. And I think learn as much as you can about your tech and the capabilities that your tech has, and talk to other people using your tech to see what's working for them and not working for them. I think all of that helps you be more effective.
Very good.